Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Bradburn, and alongside me is Logan Camden, and we just had a really fun weekend of NBA action. Lots of national TV games, lots of big matchups, and I think the biggest of them all, Logan, was the Los Angeles Lakers taking on the Denver Nuggets, the first real big matchup of the Luka Doncic era in LA, and it was by far his best game as a Laker so far, and it was a really impressive performance from the Lakers, who wire to wire just controlled that game and won it convincingly. What was your biggest takeaway from that game, Logan?
I think the Lakers could go toe-to-toe with the Nuggets in a playoff series. That's my big takeaway from this game. And I think the Lakers are more dangerous post-Anthony Davis trade. I think they're a better team now. I want to be clear about something. I still probably prefer Denver in a 7-game series, but I think the Lakers have things that they can exploit and weaponize to their advantage now. I also think J.J. Redick just can prepare this team better than Darvin Ham ever could in a hypothetical series. I thought this team was so detail-oriented and so focused on executing the game plan. And, there are other things that went well in this game that I'll get into, but that, to me, is where it started for this team and this defense. The ball pressure they were exerting on Denver, that's been a tenet kind of Denver and LA for a long time now, is what effort are we going to get, right? Effort can determine a lot of regular season basketball games, and the Lakers weren't just going to let Denver get to their spots and run their traditional offense. They were disruptive in this game. It started with the ball pressure to me, them rushing the Nuggets offense, speeding them up a little bit, making them uncomfortable, and that's what you have to do against great basketball players. You're never going to be able to fully take away something that a team does at a really high level, but you can disrupt them and make them uncomfortable, and I thought the Lakers did a really good job of that. Switching up coverages and looks in certain games, right? Being dynamic, switching to zones momentarily, going to man coverage. They were really wreaking havoc in this game, but specifically how they were able to disrupt Nikola Jokic was the biggest thing to me. Blitzing Jokic on the catch in the post when they're running pick and rolls, blitzing the ball handler, and then sending that help guy on Jokic when he rolled. And just crashing the interior every time the ball touched the paint. The Lakers sold out in this game, and that's what you got to do against a great team like Denver. And so I thought their game plan and their effort was excellent defensively against Denver. I also thought they just played really well offensively. Luka's jump shot returned in a big way. We've been waiting on it. Couldn't ask for it in a bigger spot, right, in this massive game. Something that you've mentioned a myriad of times when we're talking about the new look Lakers, playing up-tempo and in transition, I think that's a weapon of this Lakers team. And that's the big thing. If the Lakers can get stops, it's like it stacks for them. It doubles. And you can say this for a lot of different basketball teams, but specifically LA, when you've got a guy like Luka and LeBron, two guys that can push and finish in transition, you can just get easy baskets. You get a stop, boom, we're out on the break. We're down there getting a bucket before you can even get back. But specifically in this match, because I think they can weaponize that against a lot of teams in the West. Specifically in this matchup, though, in the half court, they were picking on Jokic in the pick and roll. Oh, you're going to drop? All right, we're going to spread you out 5 out, and we've got shooters everywhere. And I also thought you saw really elite mismatch attacking from Luka and LeBron both in this game. And that's something that I think they can weaponize to their advantage in this matchup, specifically when you've got lineups with guys like Jamal Murray and Christian Brown, just smaller guys that Luka and LeBron can really go at when you get switches. I thought it was an A-plus game from the Lakers, and I think they can go toe-to-toe with the Nuggets in a playoff series. In saying that, I also want to say the Nuggets played really sloppy basketball in this one. That's also the other side of this coin that I think we have to acknowledge. This was a great Lakers game. It was also just a complete letdown from Denver. And don't let the box score fool you. Denver was in this game through the third quarter. But into the third quarter and through the fourth, they just let the rope go and just let up. They had 20 turnovers for 39 points off of turnovers. Jokic had almost as many turnovers as field goals attempted. Murray had 5. Westbrook had 4. So it was a really sloppy game, but I got to tip my cap to LA. These are the games that are going to tell us what LA is capable of in these playoffs, and this was a resounding victory for them. My big takeaway, to sum it up, like I said, I think the Lakers and Nuggets can go toe-to-toe. I think the Lakers can go toe-to-toe with them in the playoffs. I think that they are more equipped to do battle with them than they were with the previous construction of their roster. But more importantly, and something that we've been harping on throughout the NBA regular season, I think the East and West are both matchup dependent. I think it's really going to depend on who these teams draw because I think that's more important than anything else. But I think the Lakers have an answer and something that they can throw at Denver to make a playoff series really competitive and potentially upset them.
They're definitely more dangerous to Denver than they were before the Anthony Davis trade. And my biggest takeaway is just I did not think that the Lakers defense could do what they just did to Jokic and the Denver offense. I was wildly impressed by that defensive performance. They were absolutely phenomenal, and they forced Jokic into his worst performance of the year. This was as good a defensive performance as I've ever seen against Nikola Jokic, and that's not an exaggeration. Their game plan was an A+. They did whatever they could to keep him from getting even decent position on a single touch in this game. They were extremely physical with him every second he was on the floor. They made every catch extremely difficult with a combination of just physicality, jostling for position, tons of fronting, tons of doubling off the catch. Even as he's just moving around off ball, they're impeding his freedom of movement. They're pestering him the entire time. So all game, you're not going to get a single clean entry pass to Jokic where he has good position. I thought that the fight that we saw from all of the dudes who took on that matchup, Rui Hachimura was so impressive. Vando picks up 3 fouls in like 3 minutes, but you know what? I loved how much of an irritant he was being. I loved how much he was fighting. He draws the offensive foul where he's just frustrating Jokic. That's the kind of stuff you have to do when you're giving up 70 pounds and several inches. I thought that DFS was another guy who was really good jostling for position, making those catches difficult. So Jokic has his 6 turnovers, but the Nuggets also turned the ball over 5 times just trying to get it into Jokic in this game, and they just couldn't because the Lakers were making it that difficult. They were cutting off the angles. They were being that active. They were using their collective length, and then Jokic did have his turnovers as well because things were just very mucked up in this game. I mean, we saw, as you said, the Lakers completely selling out on Nikola Jokic, completely loading up the paint, always sending multiple bodies at him, and the Nuggets spacing just was not good. I think that's something they can definitely improve on when we see this matchup again, but you have some instances where Jokic is trying to squeeze these passes in to a guy in the dunker spot, and he's spinning right into a double team, and the paint's just too crowded. Really, nothing can come out of that.
I just wanted to add real quick, too, especially with lineups where you have either 2 of 3 of these guys or all 3 on the court at the same time, especially when you've got Russell Westbrook, Christian Brown, and Aaron Gordon. It's like the defense can afford to sell out on those guys because you're not really scared of those guys lighting you up from deep.
And I think that that's a concern that Denver is going to have to address come playoffs, because I think that this offense has been phenomenal all year, and I've loved the added athleticism and pace and cutting that they do get from a Christian Brown and a Russell Westbrook, but at the end of the day, sometimes you just want a guy who can knock down 40% of his spot-up threes, because it's not just the crazy doubling and super aggressive help on Jokic every time that he did finally get a touch. It's off ball. They would outright double him off ball and just let Aaron Gordon, let Russell Westbrook shoot a wide open 3 just to prevent Jokic from getting that touch. And like, Aaron Gordon actually shot quite well from 3 in this game, and he has shot well from 3 all year. Russ early in the game was taking some tougher threes and was like kind of shooting them out of it a bit, but then he ended up shooting better in the second half and had a good second half. But they'll just live with that. They'll live with letting those guys shoot to prevent Jokic getting into a rhythm and repeatedly getting his touches, because they know that's going to be the best source of offense. Big picture for the Nuggets is if Jokic is comfortable getting those paint touches, able to score, able to facilitate. So the biggest win by far is that Jokic only got up 7 shot attempts in this game. Like, the only comparable defensive performance we've seen all year was what OKC did in the season opener, which was similar in terms of super aggressive double, make every catch difficult, and just force everybody else to beat you, right? Swarm Jokic and then recover out to the shooters and put the pressure on them to make shots and attack closeouts and whatnot. And OKC did a great job of that. I thought that LA was even more successfully able to X Jokic out, though. Like, literally just prevent him from getting touches in his spots. And then you have the fact that they forced so many turnovers. And that basically decided this game. Like, at the time when the starters went out in this game, when it was over, LA was plus 28 in terms of points off turnovers. Denver actually outscored them in total in the half court. They weren't more efficient, but they had 91 half court points. LA had 88. So much of this game was about turning defense into offense, which LA just did at an A+ level. And on the flip side of that, Denver's transition defense was horrible, and they had 20 turnovers, and they were too careless with the ball, right? LA did a phenomenal job of putting them in uncomfortable positions. I still think that they just turned it over too much, and some of those are on Denver for not taking good enough care of the basketball, and that's a really lethal combo. If you're going to turn the ball over a lot, and then you're not going to be serious about getting back in transition, and those are a couple things that have bit Denver too much this year. I think the biggest criticism of them all year has just been like this sort of lackadaisical energy that they approach too many games with. LA came into this game looking to bite their head off. They came into this game with an excellent game plan, and they executed it like it was a playoff game. They played with the tenacity of a team fighting for their life in a playoff game for 48 minutes. Denver did not once meet them on that level. And the physicality aspect of it, Jokic never met them on their level, which to me is really surprising because, like, if there's one thing that Jokic can do, it's bully just about anybody. Well, there's a lot of things Jokic can do at a really high level, but, like, he's as strong as any player in the league. And I just thought he was made really uncomfortable by LA, and they were able to initiate that physicality, and they were able to win in that department. And their collective effort was just an absolute A+. And like I've talked about some of the dudes who took on that Jokic matchup, but I thought that LeBron was super active defensively and played a very smart defensive game. I thought that Luka was super active defensively, and like they end this game with 15 steals and 9 blocks, man. That's a real testament to their hands. That's a real testament to, again, the collective length that this defense does have, even when they're going small. Like, it was really, really outstanding. I do think there are things that Denver can do when we see this matchup again, and we'll see it 2 more times this regular season, and we could see it in the playoffs. This could easily be a second-round matchup, 2 versus 3 seed. Here are some of the ways that Denver can counter what LA was doing to Jokic defensively in this game. Number 1, use him more as a screener. Instead of trying to get him as many of those sort of straight up post up touches where it's very easy for them to double him immediately off the catch, use him as a screener where you're just creating space inevitably. And maybe you can get him going with the pick and pop game there.
I would have him pop more because they were blitzing the
100%.
roll really well with the weak side guy.
Totally agree. I just think everything going towards the middle of the paint was very problematic because he was just getting swarmed.
And if they're going to sell out on the ball handler on the perimeter, that's how you kill them, because they're either going to have to send – it's going to get the defense in rotation. Like, they just didn't execute. I think that's a really
better
easy
to
way.
not start from a stagnant position against a swarming defense. And like you said, I think the pick and pop game is the most effective way. This may just have to be a matchup where Jokic has to play more from the perimeter, which is probably a win for the defense. But Jokic playing cleanly from the perimeter more is better than him just, again, not even being able to get touches in the paint.
Also, it just doesn't allow the defense to fully collapse and sell out there, where they have to – you have to respect the entire spacing of the floor more, which I still think Jokic can kill them with that.
I also think another way that you can have Jokic getting free more from the perimeter, have him bring the ball up more and have him run more inverted pick and roll, because then obviously they just can't do their whole deny thing, and maybe you're switching, maybe then you get a mismatch that you really like, or maybe they send 2 to the ball and he's able to spot a roller who can then find a shooter or finish himself right. It's just a way that you're negating what LA is trying to do defensively. Similarly, more off-ball screens to try to free him up, get him moving in space, get him an advantage away from the ball. I also think that, like, Denver can just space the floor better. Part of that is maybe their lineups, but I did think that they were trying to do too much cutting, too much clogging up the paint, where it's just like, look, even if you're a mediocre shooter, this is a matchup where we just want you getting wide open for 3 as opposed to trying to finish in a paint where there's 4 defenders and in all likelihood, Jokic isn't even going to be able to get that pass down to you. I also thought it was kind of underratedly brutal that Julian Strawther picked up 5 fouls in 3 minutes, because he actually would have been a nice guy to have in the rotation for this game just because of that shooting value. And then, like, you're getting Hunter Tyson minutes. No hate. Hunter Tyson is just not an NBA player. So
you were getting Zeke Naji minutes too, bro.
I know. Naji's been playing better as of late. He has, but, like, just give me the shooter. Give me the shooter in that lineup. And I do think the final component just comes down to Jokic being more aggressive and being more physical, and him saying, okay, that's fine. You can make life hard on me. I'm going to fight for this catch. I'm going to be ready to play through fouls, because Jokic got fouled a lot in this game. Like, he takes 10 free throws. he got fouled more times than that. And some of it is away from the ball. Some of it is just, right, that constant hands on him, trying to impede his freedom of movement. But, like, he's got to be ready to deal with that, man. Especially if a team's going small. He's Nikola Jokic. He has to know, first of all, he never gets the best whistle, but, like, just very big dude against a guy giving up 60 pounds is not generally going to get favorable calls. So he has to be ready to play through that. And also, like, put the pressure on the ref to make a call, right? Be physical, be aggressive, try to assert yourself as a scorer more. So I think there's a number of ways that Denver can try to bounce back and counter this and figure it out. And I honestly think if you were to give them a playoff series, like, I think that they would do it. I think better spacing, more ways to get Jokic touches on the perimeter, more ways to free him up off ball. They have avenues to improve there, and just taking better care of the basketball, right? I just think they were really caught off guard, and they were really overwhelmed by this defensive game plan, and the turnovers were such a big part of it. I think that that would be cleaner over a whole series. But the other big problem for Denver in this game is their defense, and specifically, I thought, dealing with the Luka Doncic pick and roll. I don't like them having Jokic come out so high and basically blitzing every time, because you're just hemorrhaging open threes, and you're hemorrhaging open threes to really good shooters. The Lakers have a lot of good shooters. Rui Hachimura took 9 threes in this game. I'll be damned if every one of them just about wasn't wide open. That's not a good outcome for you as a defense. Or Luka is doing what he does better than anybody else, where if you send 2 to the ball, he's going to look off that weak side shooter, fake the skip pass, and then all of a sudden Jackson Hayes is just totally freed up on the roll, and you're getting a wide open dunk. I also just thought Denver's low men didn't play the pick and roll very well, right? There was one time that MPJ got totally fooled by that Luka looking off the skip pass, and then there was another time where it's like Aaron Gordon and Jokic are the ones guarding the pick and roll action up high. So you've got Christian Brown as your low man. He actually made the right play, and he met Jackson Hayes there with decent timing, but he's just too small. So there's a number of issues that the Lakers offense presents to the Denver defense. I think that Denver is better off trying Jokic in more of a high drop, which is generally his preferred coverage, right? He comes up almost to the level of the screen, and he's in a drop, but he's not sitting in a deep drop because that's not where he's very good, right? He's just not that level of rim protector athlete. Like, you want him in a place where he's able to use his hands and he's able to apply a little bit of pressure to the ball handler, but not a lot. I don't think that you can sell out on Luka like this in this offense, and especially not like if your team defense isn't going to be super connected and dialed in around him. But they don't have good answers. Like, Denver just doesn't have good answers for this Lakers offense, and really nobody has good answers for this Lakers offense. It's going to be a shootout if we see it again. So the pressure is going to be on Denver to figure things out for them offensively and improve where they can defensively. But the Lakers offense is a weapon. That was never in question, that this is going to be a top 5 sort of offense. It's the defense that I've been really questioning, and this was an A-plus performance by them in what I thought was going to be a particularly difficult matchup for them defensively.
Yeah, I've only got a couple things to add. One, the Denver defense point, I do think Denver's defensive issues were exacerbated by the fact that they couldn't get a lot going offensively. And what I mean by that is they gifted the Lakers a lot of free points and turnovers and just letting them get out on the break. And again, what I mean by that is by Denver's offense always continuously humming, what you're forcing the opposing defense to do is set up in the half court. 100%. And it's just harder to get buckets like that. Now, I expect the Lakers to be a great half-court offense, but when you have a bad defense, when you're not getting points offensively, it just makes it that much harder to stay in the game. And so while I do think it's important that Denver gets better defensively, I think they just have to execute better offensively because it just makes everything so much easier for them. It slows down the game, and in my opinion, I think a slow, methodical game where it's won and lost in the half court, I think it favors Denver just a little bit more. That being said, I'm not counting the Lakers out, and this is stating the most obvious of all time, like the most obvious point of all time, but now that they've gotten Luka Doncic, they have a guy that in a hypothetical series against the Denver Nuggets can outplay Nikola Jokic, and that's the most important thing that you can have. Not to mention the fact that he can just counter their biggest issue defensively, which is if you go with Jokic every single possession on defense, you're, one, making him work that much harder and forcing him to expend a lot of energy that he can't offensively, theoretically, but also you're just attacking a weakness of his in defense, which is guarding in space. And so this isn't going to be a walk in the park. I think this series would go 6 or 7, and I'm leaning 7. I think it would be a war, and I think the Lakers have a chance at doing some real damage. When you've got a player the caliber of Luka Doncic, when you've got the offensive skill and ability around Luka that you do here, the two-man game with him and LeBron, like you said, man, there's just no easy answers. Like, again, it's stating the obvious, but when you got guys that are both brilliant basketball players that can score from anywhere inside the arc, that can run actions with each other, that can mismatch attack at a high level, there's just not a good answer for Luka and LeBron. I mean, the Lakers are scary. I think the Lakers are a scary basketball team. Let me ask you this. We were really contentious with Jason when he came on the show. Are you closer to the hierarchy that Jason laid out than you were then?
Well, I think that he's just a lot lower on OKC than I am. But when it comes to LA compared to Denver, because what Jason said is he has them all in the same tier. I still think OKC is in a tier of their own. But I don't think that I could have Denver in a different tier from LA after seeing how well LA defended in this game. Like, that was the entire thing to me. I just thought they would not have answers. And I was so impressed by their collective buy-in, their collective execution.
And yeah,
I was wowed.
That's one more thing. I mean, I hate using this cliche when we're talking about sports teams, but the Lakers have got a lot of heart that they didn't have for a long time at the beginning of this season. This is a team that is energized, that is rejuvenated. This is a basketball team that has hope. And that's a scary thing, man. When you've got a team that really believes, like, there's an energy, there's a vibe with this team, man. I hate using those cliche words, but this is a Lakers team that is bought in and I think really and truly believes that they're on the verge of potentially doing something very special this season if everything comes together.
It was the sort of effort and game plan that you just don't often see in the regular season. There's just too many games to bring it like that every night, but like, oh my God, dude. Vando played like a psycho when he was in. DFS played like a psycho.
Yeah,
Gabe Vincent played like a psycho. Jordan Goodwin was awesome defensively. Like, it was everybody, and I just don't think that Denver was prepared for that at all on a Saturday night in February. So if LA defends like this going forward, I just think that's clearly a top 3 team in the West. I've been saying the bar for them to be a contender is just if they can be a solid defense. And I thought that they would be a bottom 10 defense. They've got some more tests coming up over the next couple weeks, but this game was very telling to me about their seriousness defensively, the effort of their role guys, which is just an absolute A+, and their coaching. JJ Redick is an absolute difference maker. JJ Redick is a really good X's and O's guy, and I also think that he's a good culture guy. I think he's a good leader. He is a psychopath as a competitor, and I think that you've seen that throughout the year. This was really impressive, man, and they're getting the right combinations of dudes on the floor. They're getting their defensive-minded guys out there, and then they have their offensive big 3, which was just stellar, absolutely stellar, which is no surprise, but I thought that LeBron, Luka, and Austin Reeves, who's been playing like a star for a couple months, were all extremely impressive. This was like the best game that the Lakers possibly could have played. It was really, really wildly impressive. So, big takeaway, yeah. This Lakers defense, if they keep playing like this, totally changes what I think this team can be. Let's talk about a team, Logan, who had the opposite narrative sprouting up about them after this weekend. The New York Knicks. They just got destroyed by the Cavs, and then they got handled pretty easily by the Celtics. They now fall to 0-7 versus the top 3 teams in the NBA on the season, and they've lost those games by an average of 20 points. Are the Knicks fake contenders, Logan?
Unfortunately, I think so. It's so important for this team to get stops, and I just don't trust them enough. We're talking about them against the top teams. Against Boston, they've posted a defensive rating of 137.4 in 3 games. Against Cleveland, they've posted a defensive rating of 127.8 in 2 games. And against Oklahoma City, they've posted a defensive rating of 124.1. That's against the Thunder in 2 games. And I really worry about them in all these matchups. And I understand with the Knicks that they've dealt with some injury issues recently, right? For a little bit of a stretch, they've had some of their wings out. Mitchell Robinson, right, is up in the air. They just got, and we've said this about the Knicks before. This is not a new thought that we brought up here on Nerd Sesh, but I just think they have two big liabilities at two very important positions in their lineup that really makes it hard to be a good defense. That being Jalen Brunson at the point of attack as your point guard, just being a really small guard, and then having Karl-Anthony Towns at your 5 spot. And I think the Knicks have a good pick and roll defense. I think they're a good isolation basketball team on the whole, but they are a bottom 10 transition defense. I thought that was on full display against Boston, and they're the worst spot up defense in the NBA. I just really worry about them in all of these matchups, specifically against Boston, the one that we just saw. Jalen Brunson going up against Derek White and Drew Holiday. That's a really tough matchup for him. Karl-Anthony Towns, I think that they have a lot of good options. It's just such a luxury for Boston to have all these great perimeter defenders and then a guy like Kristaps Porzingis that can anchor the interior. The Knicks are so good at generating easy offense, and against Boston, they just can't do it. Cleveland, the same thing. Oklahoma City, right? And then on the other end, they can't get any stops. They don't have the personnel. I think they need that high-end rim protector, man, and they desperately need Mitchell Robinson. And unfortunately, with Mitchell Robinson out there, I don't trust Mitchell Robinson. There's just guys in the league that have had so many injury issues that I can't ever have full faith in them being available. Robert Williams is a good example. Mitchell Robinson is another one of those guys, and I really like Mitchell Robinson when he's on the basketball court. He's a guy that transforms your team with what he can do rebounding the basketball, with how he can protect the rim. I don't say that lightly. Like, I think people would go, oh, Mitchell Robinson? No, Mitchell Robinson is a legitimate game changer in how he changes the game when he's on the floor. But I just don't trust him enough to be healthy. And so when we're looking at their prospects in the playoffs, sure, the Knicks offense can get rolling. And OG and Macau can knock down one-dribble pull-ups and hit their threes at a decent clip. Deuce McBride I like a lot, right? And we know what Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns can do. I don't trust this team to get enough stops. I don't trust this transition defense enough. And I really think against the high-end real contenders in the NBA today, I think those teams have defensive answers for the Knicks that they don't have on the other end. I don't know, Carson. I felt really, really deflated after that Boston game, man. I've been rooting for New York to figure this out. The measuring stick to me is Boston. We've seen 3 games. 137.4 defensive rating. I mean, they just don't have the answers, man. Tatum is going to pick this team apart playmaking-wise. They are going to spread this defense out with 5 out, and this defense is going to hemorrhage threes. I worry about Jalen Brunson defending against anybody in this lineup because he's giving up so much size. Yeah. I worry about Karl-Anthony Towns defending in space against this team. There's just too many glaring holes for the Knicks for me to really consider them. The depth that they have, the defensive versatility, and unfortunately, the red flags with this defense. I think the defense is going to get exposed. It's crazy, man. What let them down in the playoffs last year, Carson? It was the fact that their offense couldn't get anything going. It was Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein mucking up shit, making it grimy, getting into these defensive, hard-nosed battles that they won. We've seen a drastic identity change from this Knicks roster, and unfortunately, I think that's the component that this team is missing right now. The defense and just the bodies, man. I don't think the Knicks have it this year. I really like the Knicks' future. I like this core that they have with OG and Bridges and Brunson and Cat. I think they need more defenders, and they just don't have them at the right positions right now.
I honestly think it's more complicated than that for the Knicks, because the problem that they are facing and they are going to continue to face is that their 2 best players are 2 archetypes who are difficult to build a champion around. You have the very small, bad defensive guard, and then you have the bad defensive center. And the second one is the more problematic one when it comes to building a contender. You can build the defense around the small, bad defensive guard. It's challenging to do, but then if you're also going to have a bad defender at your most important position, like, that might just be insurmountable, because I actually think they've put the right kind of wings around them. It just doesn't matter when you're facing a team like Boston, because at that point, your defense is only as good as your weakest link, because they're going to find that weakest link.
Word to Roddy Piper, man. You figure out the answers against Boston, and they change the questions, man.
They just have so many ways to beat you, and they are going to exploit your weakness. at any given time. So, like, the Knicks are really, really good. And I think that they are going to be a team that probably pretty easily wins their first round playoff series, depending on who they draw. But I definitely think that they're the third best team in the East still. They just cannot beat the two best teams in their conference. And this is what I said after their season opener against the Celtics. There's just no way they are beating that team when you have both Jalen Brunson and Cat on the floor.
You still like the Knicks more than Milwaukee?
I do. I mean, I think that they're probably closer to Milwaukee than they are to Cleveland and Boston, but I
would
think
agree with that.
The Knicks offense is dominant, and they haven't had their best showings against some of these elite teams, right? Like especially the Thunder really have given their offense some trouble, and that's a historic defense. That's what they do, but I trust this team to really produce offensively in a series against Boston. I do. Now it's a difficult matchup for them, but Brunson's actually played pretty well against them. I think Cat actually can do quite well offensively against Boston. The thing is just you have zero ways to make them uncomfortable with your defense. And as good as your offense is, like Boston just has way, way better defensive personnel. That's what makes Boston such a great team. And that's what makes them still the safest pick for the title. They're the only team that is reliably great on both ends. You can look at Cleveland and say that's a great offense and it's a very good defense, but they have certain liabilities, or at least they have certain players who are not active strong points on their defense. You can look at OKC, and that's a historic defense, and it's a very good offense, but they have stretches where their offense can slow down, and they can struggle in the non-Shea minutes, and do they have the creation alongside him? Boston, it's just like, yeah, everybody on the floor is a high-level offensive player, and everybody on the floor is a high-level defensive player in their starting five, and they've got good depth, and Cat just couldn't hang defensively. He just can't hang defensively in this matchup. He's in this high drop. He's really struggling. I thought that Boston could have put up more points in this game than they did, honestly. Like, KP is getting some wide open pick and pop threes. He's just not necessarily hitting all of them. Tatum didn't have the most efficient scoring game, but I thought that he controlled this game and got whatever he wanted, and I thought the playmaking was excellent. Derek White is getting whatever he wants against Jalen Brunson. Brunson's losing him around screens. Like, the Knicks have two very prominent defensive weak links, and you're just not going to survive that against Boston. They are too damn good. Everybody on the floor is too damn good at pinpointing those sort of vulnerabilities, and the Knicks have fallen back to 20th in defensive rating now. Like, there was a stretch of the year where they were defending better, and they've just fallen back into that being a real liability for them when we're talking about what they could be as a contender. And you look at the Cavs game, I mean, the Cavs lit them up a whole lot more, and the Cavs guards, Mitchell, Garland, and Ty Jerome, were getting whatever they wanted against Cat and pick and roll. Like, it's hard. I love Cat because I think he's one of the most gifted offensive bigs we've ever seen, but he really, really is a pretty destructive center to your own defense. It's just so limiting when you have a guy who is that limited as a rim protector, who is that limited as a pick and roll defender overall, and especially as a drop defender. But if you do get him in space a little more, he can get toasted.
Long term, they should move him back to the 4, right?
I think
that's got to be the solution, right? Like, I get that you're going to hinder some of your offense, but I think you give that right back when you've got him at the 5 spot defensively.
He's a significantly better defender at the 4. I mean, we saw he just had a really solid defensive season in Minnesota at the 4. I don't know if he's ever going to be in a better situation, ironically, than he was in Minnesota, which is funny because you look at his individual production and it's skyrocketed since he left. And it's like only now this season have people started to fully appreciate the sort of crazy talent that Cat really is. But at the same time, the team in Minnesota last year had a much better chance because they could have that elite defense. And then Cat is not in his best situation offensively, but he's so good that he can still scrape out his efficient 20 a night for you. And he can still be a huge positive on that end, although not as much as he would be at the center spot. Mitchell Robinson just does not make up the ground that this team has to make up, man. And the real problem is Jalen Brunson being another liability. Like, I just don't know how Cat really succeeds in a defensive environment when you don't have studs all around him, because that's what Minnesota had last year. Not only was Cat at the 4, everybody else in that starting lineup was a really good defensive player, and that's just not the case here in New York. So are they a fake contender? Yes, not because they aren't one of the 6 best teams in basketball. I think that they are that. They just cannot beat the 3 best teams in basketball.
And that's why I think I prefer the Bucks over them now, is just because of how I think the Bucks match up with some of these other teams. It's a toss-up. I think both of those teams are flawed, but I just like the trajectory that the Bucks have been on more recently.
Yeah, I can see the vision. I mean, obviously you have the Dame and Giannis factor, and I think that Kuz has honestly fit in quite well with them. I think his defensive effort's been really impressive.
I've really liked Kuzma. I've really liked how Brook Lopez has been playing as of recently.
They're a hell of a lot better defensively. There's no question about that. And
I just think that they have more answers for some of these other teams. I just, like you said, man, you're only as strong as your weakest link defensively.
Yeah, you are. When teams are just as good and skilled and have as many players who can create on the floor as Cleveland and Boston, but especially Boston. So I can definitely see that case where it's just like Milwaukee is not going to be left helpless in a series like that, like New York is, where you're like, maybe New York can push this 6 just going crazy.
Yeah, I can see him getting dogged against one of these teams.
The thing is, like, they're just more talented than Milwaukee. Their offense is so much better than Milwaukee's. Like, if you were to ask me who's more of a lock to win their first round series, I definitely think that it's New York compared to Milwaukee. If you were to ask me who poses more of a threat to Cleveland or Boston, I would say neither one poses a threat, honestly. And I guess I'll still take New York just because of that offensive factor. But I see what you're saying. It's reasonably close between the two of them. This is tough for New York because I just don't know how it gets that much better. Like I said, bringing in Mitchell Robinson, I think the improvement that you'll see defensively will be offset by the regression that you see offensively, and you're still not getting to a place like, I'm sorry, dude, having Cat and Mitchell Robinson on the floor defensively against the Celtics, like, that's not really the answer. And Brunson, that's 3 dudes who Jason Tatum can get a switch on and feel like he is going to be cooking. That's 3 dudes who Jalen Brown can get a switch. Like, you just need a ton of speed. You need a ton of versatile defenders. That's why I like how OKC matches up so much defensively with Boston. And you need to not have a weak link. It's just that simple. They'll find that weak point. So what do? Like, you've gone all in on this core. You got better. I still think 100% the Knicks are better than they were in their previous iteration with Julius Randle and whatnot. Losing Hartenstein obviously sucks. I mean, if they could have kept Hartenstein, then that changes this whole conversation, because now you have a center who you can play alongside Cat defensively, who is just a legitimate plus offensively in a way that obviously Mitchell Robinson is not at all. And like, I think that wouldn't put them on Boston's level, or probably not even Cleveland's level, but it would definitely get them closer and make me feel better about how they can improve. Right now, I'm just looking at a team that is built around 2 guys who have major issues on the same side of the ball. And it's going to be extremely difficult for them to overcome to become a true contender.
Yeah, I think I fundamentally agree with that. I mean, the only thing I would suggest is seeing if you can get more bench pieces that can make up for that. Just more versatile guys where maybe you can stagger some of their minutes. You can mitigate the issues of them being on the court together. But again, that's when your offense is at its best. So it's a real give and take thing here.
And they've both had amazing offensive seasons. Like career offensive seasons.
And they amplify one another.
Mm-hmm.
I think you kind of have that guy already in a Deuce McBride, off the bench, because Deuce is so fucking good, just defensively, effort, rebounding, shooting. He's the total package. We've always loved Deuce, but at the 5 spot, I think you got to find a guy, and if that is Mitchell Robinson and you're running him in some spots, I don't know, I'd want a guy that brings me some of that defense and some of that athleticism as well, that I can just, for periods of the game, I just don't have both of those guys being as super exploitable. But there's not an easy answer, and like you said, man, the Knicks have kind of painted themselves into a corner where this is going to be their core. They've paid these guys, they've given up a lot of draft capital and assets to go in, and I think it was the right decision. Now, the amount of capital they gave up to acquire these guys, the Cat trade I do 100 times out of 100. Macau one, I maybe wouldn't have liked to give up as much capital as they did, but
Yeah.
they're committed. You've got to roll with it, and you got to figure it out. The one thing I will say, too, this is the first year of the experiment. Thibodeau is a smart guy. Their depth has really been compromised this year.
For sure.
I think this situation could improve within an offseason.
Definitely. They can definitely get better. How do they get to the point where the Boston Celtics don't get whatever they
lose
want
Porzingis,
against them?
so you're looking probably in about 2 years where Porzingis to me is the X factor. I thought he was the guy that changed the complexion of that game yesterday because he's such a game-breaking weapon with his skill set. An agile 7'3" guy who can protect the hell out of the rim and spray from deep and attack mismatches. To me, Porzingis is the guy that unlocks everything for Boston. Jason Tatum is their best player, and I think it's so much unwarranted hate. And I think it's just because of how great the team is around him and how much of a letdown his playoff run was last year. And like I said, Tatum's the best guy. Porzingis, to me, is the guy that puts the Celtics over the top and makes them so unstoppable.
I agree. So, yeah, I mean, if you're looking at a post-Porzingis world, if you just put a more replacement-level big in there, then I think that Boston does become less dangerous because, I mean, KP is so good on both sides of the floor, but, I mean, particularly offensively, he is just a walking weapon with his combination of mismatch attacking, post-up skill, and that elite floor spacing. That's going to be a couple years, man. If it does happen, and I do think that Boston will lose KP, but even then, like, New York is still going to have issues in that matchup because we don't know what Boston will look like a couple years down the line. But as long as they have Tatum and Brown and Derek White, and even if you inject Peyton Pritchard into that lineup, he poses problems for this defense.
I mean, and they've got Pritchard and Hauser on really team-friendly deals.
Great deals. And then Cleveland, like, you still have to figure out what you do with Cleveland, which I don't think is as much of a nightmare for them, but it's still a real problem with those guards going up against Cat and pick and roll. I feel bad for Knicks fans. I do, because this is an awesome season and it should be a ton of fun. But I think if you had the expectation that you were going to go out there and win the title, then this has got to be disappointing because this is just not going to happen. Speaking of disappointments, Logan, one of the biggest stories that I have seen going around, at least on NBA Twitter over the last couple weeks, has been the struggles of Paolo Banchero, who has had some really brutal efficiency since he came back. George Niang was talking shit to him, and he said, keep shooting that mid-range, see where that gets you. I'm not going to lie, he cooked with that one. He cooked him. How worried are you about Paolo's struggles, Logan?
This season, I'm worried about Orlando and their playoff prospects. I mean, when we're looking at the next step for Orlando, when you're moving from this bargain bin team to a contender, you have to go through stages of evolution, right? So the Magic went from in the basement, then they graduated to making the playoffs. The next step for this team is to win a playoff series. I still think that's going to be problematic when we're looking at them this season in the first round, just considering what level of offense can they reach. And Paolo balled out last year in the playoffs against Cleveland. He had some great games. He was their best player by far. I am worried about them, though, because he's going to have to pull his weight. Franz is going to have to be great, and that's the struggle with Orlando. They just struggle to create easy offense. This is an elite defense with a lot of great defensive pieces. They're going to need Paolo to not only pull his weight, but be probably the best offensive player in the series. And it's been really ugly. Since he returned in January, Paolo's giving you 21, 7, and 5 on 40% from the field, 29% from deep, on 49% true shooting with 3.2 turnovers per game. Paolo Banchero, Carson, has been the least efficient 20-point-per-game scorer since returning by 4.5%.
Oh, my. Well, maybe Jordan Poole dipped under 20, or maybe he's not at 20.
Second is De'Aaron Fox. It's a pretty staggering mark. Fox is at 53.5%. Paolo's at 49% true shooting flat. And so...
yeah, damn, wow. I was selling Poole short. His efficiency is pretty solid, yeah.
He's been all right.
He has had a good year.
And there are things that we've seen with Paolo that I think he's always struggled with, that he's struggling with more right now. Off ball, I think, is the biggest area where Paolo needs to improve as an offensive player. He's a 24% catch and shooter this season. He's a 14th percentile spot-up player. He's just kind of hard to fit into an offense when the ball isn't in his hands, and that shouldn't be a thing. Like, I think there are a lot of things that Orlando could try to do with Paolo that would make him a much a more efficient off-ball player. I mean, I'm running screening actions with him with these guards, and I'm having him roll hard to the rim a lot. And like Paolo still is drawing free throws at a decent rate. That's one of the encouraging things I'd say about his return. Is that's one of my favorite things is Paolo's build should make him a bull in a china shop. This is a guy that I just want lowering his head and getting to the rim. Like those are the best looks for him. Mm-hmm. We're seeing him settle for a lot of jump shots. We're seeing him try to fit in off ball. The uncharacteristic things that have really been surprising to me, not finishing well inside the arc, missing easy layups, missing post-ups. Like, that's why I say I'm concerned about him this year. Long term, I think Paolo's going to figure it out. I'm still very, very confident in Paolo being a top 15 player on the planet, a top 15 to 10 player, I think, one day. There just aren't guys that come around that are 6'10", that are 250 plus pounds, that are this gifted athletically. And then you add with that a guy who I do believe in his jump shot long term. I think his footwork is immaculate. That's one of the things that I bank in long term with Paolo. You watch him in his post game, I think Paolo's got really good footwork, and I think it's a really good foundation for him long term in figuring out his jump shot. He just hasn't figured it out yet, but he's got a really solid handle. I think Paolo's a good rebounder, but he's not an efficient offensive player right now. He just isn't, and that's the reality. That's the real struggle. So I think long term, I think he's got to get better as an off-ball player. And I do think he has to settle less, Carson. I mean, it's goofy when you got a guy like the G-Wagon goofing on you, but I do think it's a struggle that Paolo's going to have to get better at. Yeah, 100%. I mean, getting downhill more often, really weaponizing that physicality, and settling less. So long term, I'm not worried about Paolo whatsoever. He's been back a month. I mean, we've seen guys struggle coming back off of injuries for longer than this. But that is my concern. I'd say my biggest concern about Paolo right now isn't long-term. It's about what Orlando can do in the playoffs this year. And if Paolo is going to be the least efficient 20-point-per-game scorer in basketball leading up to the playoffs, guess what? They're going to get bounced in the first round. That's not a hot take. That's just reality. That's what's going to happen to Orlando if Paolo isn't pulling his weight. So, yeah, I'm not worried about him long-term, but I certainly am worried about Paolo and the Magic's prospects this season.
I'm moderately concerned about Paolo. I think a lot of people have taken it too far on NBA Twitter, and this is a phenomenon that just happens, and I've actually seen a lot of...
It's like with Halliburton almost, man.
Just happens, especially with young players. I think that if you hyper-fixate on efficiency with a really young player, you might be missing out on stuff. Or I saw our friend Tyler from Hoop Venue tweeted out something about, like, dudes talking about like people's Darko plus minus regression or whatever the fuck ridiculous all in one metric, and they're dealing with like rookie guards and they're saying, oh, this guy isn't good because of that. It's like rookie guards have always been inefficient. That's the way that it's been since the dawn of time. You need to give young players time to grow. It's like prospects. Like, if you're talking about a rookie, that guy was a prospect 6 months ago. You're not just drafting him based on...
They're still improving.
Still years of improvement still to come. Now, Paolo's in year 3, so I'm not saying that we should talk about him like he's a rookie, and that's why I'm moderately concerned, because there are things that by year 3 you want to see improving that are not improving for him right now. And I've always said about Paolo that, like, he has this potential to be a top 10 sort of guy, and I've been high on him in that sense, but I've also said a lot of people are much too high on what he is right now. Last year to me was the prime example of that. People are talking about him as an all-star. Who does this look like, Logan? Who does this look like? And everybody wanted us to say LeBron. That was crazy. And people talking about him like he was already a top 25 or a top 20 player last year. I was like, let's just slow down. Let's appreciate the reason that this Orlando team is great is because of their depth and their defense, and Paolo can eat up some offensive volume, but he's not efficient. He had the negative on-off splits last year, but the talent is so obvious, what he can grow into, and like the ability for a second-year player, the production was still super impressive. You don't expect a guy of that age in that offensive situation to be super efficient or necessarily to have like the most impressive impact metrics because you're a really young guy in a tough offensive situation. But like I said, this year Paolo has been a lot worse than he was last year, which is really unfortunate because over the first 5 games, Paolo was playing his best basketball. And there were a couple clunkers in there, but there were also a few dominant performances. Most notably, the 50-piece against
that
Indiana.
Pacers game, man, yeah.
Best game he's ever played, bar none. And the reason it was the best game he's ever played, bar none, and the reason that I was so excited about the Paolo that we saw early this year, and I thought maybe he has taken a leap, he was just going through people, man. He was playing bully ball. He was utilizing what makes him special, which is I'm 6'10", I'm 250, first and foremost, right? Yes, I have this skill. That's supposed to be the icing on the cake for my game. The problem is you cannot keep me away from the rim. You cannot keep me off the line. I can do so many different things. I can post up mismatches. I can screen and roll. I can run the floor hard in transition. That's when Paolo's at his best, when he blends the wing stuff with the big man stuff, because that's the sort of skill set that he can have. Right now, he's playing like he's Melo circa 2016, man. I mean, he is in love with the mid-range, and he's always liked the mid-range stuff, but he's got the 3rd most mid-range attempts per game this year. He's taking 5 per game, and he's shooting 39% there. So the G-Wagon cooked him, bro. He looked at the analytics sheet, the scouting report, and said, let him take the mid-range jumpers, and it's right to say that.
And guys are sagging off of him. I mean, they're not afraid, 3-point line when he's off ball, even when he drives. And unfortunately, that's kind of the way to play him.
100%.
It's the best strategy.
100%. And in the playoffs last year against Cleveland, Paolo had this incredible jump shooting series. And he deserved credit for that because it was a phenomenal offensive series that he put forth.
58% on pull-ups or something ridiculous like that.
It was over 50% for mid-range when he was under 40% in the regular season. And he shot 40% on pull-up threes when he was just above 30% in the regular season. So it was crazy impressive. But what I made sure to say at the time is that's not sustainable, right? That's not how Paolo's going to be the best version of himself going forward because he's not going to shoot like that over a larger sample. And this year has been regression to prove that in a really brutal way. But even last year, he was at 4.2 mid-range attempts per game. I did not want to see that number go up, and that number has gone up. There are 29 players in the NBA this year who take at least 7 pull-up jumpers per game. The only one of those players less efficient on pull-up jumpers than Paolo is Jalen Green. He's averaging 0.88 points per jumper. That's a 23rd percentile number. He's a 14th percentile catch and shoot guy. I mean, he's been worse taking catch and shoot threes than he's been taking pull-up threes, which is a real problem just for his ability to play off ball and fit alongside a guy like Franz. And again, he's settling for these shots even more. He's driving about 20% less than he was last year, which is just so frustrating when you look at Paolo and you look at a performance like the Indiana game and you think if you just put your shoulder into that guy and go through him, there's nothing that he can do. And Paolo is not doing that. And I understand the spacing is not always great in Orlando, okay, and these are things that have factored into his shot selection, but there are a ton of spots where you can look at, and he has a mismatch on an island. I tweeted out a clip last night as I'm going through it. He's got Bub Carrington switched onto him, okay? That is a guy who is conceding 6 inches and 60 pounds to Paolo. Paolo starts in a face-up, turns his back to him, one dribble, he's moved him 4 feet. Now he's probably 10 feet from the basket. What does he do? He swings his non-pivot foot, and he takes a fadeaway. And all of a sudden, this is like a 16-footer when he was moving that guy like he's a kid. I just am infuriated when a guy who has those sort of physical skills settles for shots like that.
He's just got to play smarter. It's
by far the biggest issue. I would give Paolo's shot selection an F. I think it is horrible. I think it is some of the absolute worst in the league. It's the worst by any star in the league. I mean, he takes terrible shots considering the sort of shots that he should be able to manufacture for himself. And so you have the terrible efficiency. And now this is the 3rd straight year where Paolo has a clear negative on-off differential. The Magic are 6 points per 100 worse with him on the floor in his career. Most of that is because their defense is worse with him on the floor, just because he's a very unremarkable defender, and Orlando is a spot where they have a lot of good defenders. He's not a bad defender, but he's pretty consistently their weakest defender on the floor. But now also, for back-to-back years, their offensive rating has been markedly worse with him on the floor.
Their offensive rating with Paolo on the floor is 105.5.
And you want to know the really damning stuff? When Franz is on the floor without Paolo this year, when Franz is out there with no Paolo, Orlando is a +11 net team. They play like an elite basketball team. when Paolo and Franz are out there together, they're a -2 net rating team. Like, I think the worst lineup duo that Franz has been a part of this year is him with Paolo.
Do you agree with me that they should run like more actions with him as like the roll guy? Like,
What's hard, dude, is he doesn't roll hard. Like, he screened a ton in the Atlanta game the other day. He pops 90% of the time. And a lot of the time, he pops for an 18-footer, too. He doesn't even pop all the way out for a 3.
They're just bad shots. Like,
they are.
Collapse the defense. He would draw attention.
And he's a really good passer.
Yeah,
that's a huge reason that
exactly.
I am still more optimistic than the people who I'm seeing dragging Paolo right now, because I'm like, he has A+ physical tools. He shoots 8 free throws a game. He can get to the rim at a crazy rate, and he can really, really play make in those spots and create a ton of shots for shooters, lay down passes for bigs.
Maxed out Paolo, I've always said to me, is like Tatum, but he's got to get there. He's got to figure, like, Tatum plays so smart right now. That's why I love watching Tatum play, is it's beautiful decision making. It is, he's just taking what the defense gives him, and he's not forcing the issue, and he's so in control. And I just don't, there's like a mental, there's just like not, it doesn't fully click for Paolo. I don't know if he fully understands how to weaponize his value.
No, he doesn't. He clearly doesn't right now. And he's 22 years old. Shot selection can absolutely get better after you're 22. It's one of the things that I tend to expect to improve in a young player. But it's not good when your shot selection isn't getting better in year 3. Like, that's the thing. You don't expect to see a miraculous leap all at once. You just want to see gradual improvement. And I thought we were seeing that improvement at the start of the year, and now we've seen major regression there. Maybe part of it is that he's coming back from the injury, but he's been back from the injury for 20 games now. That's why I hadn't talked about this up until now, because it's like you give a guy a grace period when he's coming back from an injury, I always think. But I think we're past that grace period now. And by the way, I was reading off the lineup stuff. Franz, no Paolo, they're +11 net. Paolo and Franz together, they're -2 net. Paolo, no Franz, they're a -8 net rating team. Like, there is just no question who their best player has been this year. It's been Franz by a mile. I mean, Franz has been the better scorer. He's been the more efficient scorer. He's the much better defender. They're both very good as playmakers, but Franz has been like a guy with a legitimate star impact, and Paolo has been a guy who is going to put up enough shots to where his numbers might look like that of a star if you literally just look at raw production, but the efficiency, the impact has not been that of a star basketball player this year. So, as I've always said with Paolo, there's the difference between what he is right now and what he can be. And people historically, I think, have been too high on what he is right now. And now maybe some people are too low on what he can be because of what he is right now and how he's struggling. Like, again, there is so much ability for Paolo to grow into because of the passing, because of the physical advantages. He just has to do it. Like, his struggles right now, to me, are not some shock. Because if he goes cold as a shooter like he has been with his shot selection, like, yeah, absolutely, that can happen. You just don't want to see him trending in the wrong direction. That's the reason that I'm concerned right now.
I'm still going to hold out for hope for Paolo. I think.
So am I, to be clear. I mean, there's a lot of people who are, like, victory lapping and, like.
That's what I hate. That's actually, I think that's my biggest issue when we talk about players, is I think there's a lot of people that so desperately want to be vindicated on, like, their pre-draft takes or, like, a 100%. Take that they've had about a player, and then so when they can find a month of basketball that corroborates with the narrative that they're trying to push, they will only, it's confirmation bias, and I tend to think he's a 22-year-old wing that has tools that very few players in the league today do. Yeah. He's already so good at so many things, and again, I think the biggest issue with Paolo is the mental aspect of the game, is just understanding how to weaponize his value and how to play winning basketball. And that's not something that is, unique to just Paolo. It's a thing that happens with a lot of young players, and I only think he's going to get better. And so, yeah, I mean, it's year 3. I'm not saying that there aren't things that we need to be worried about, but he's such a rare prospect. He's such a good young player, and he is coming back from an injury, so I tend to give him grace. I don't think it's all going to come together this season, but I'm still in on Paolo, man. I'm not ready to shed any of my stock, man. He's so young and he's so talented. I'm optimistic.
So am I. But the one thing I will say is if you compare him to some of the other young guys who certain people have tried to put him over, or like tried to say
Chet,
those guys don't
for
even belong
example,
in
a
the
guy in his
conversation.
same draft class that even missed a year, I think Chet is so far beyond Paolo right
100%.
now in terms of how he understands his value, how he impacts the game in winning, and just how he plays. Like, I think Chet just has a much better fundamental understanding of how to maximize his own winning impact. Mobley, for example, I think is already leaps and bounds ahead
You're
of
taking
Paolo
the names
in that
out of my
regard.
mouth, man. I mean, those are the two exact guys I was going to say. And there's a reason that I've always preferred those guys. I preferred them as prospects to Paolo, even though I really like Paolo. It's just an insanely valuable archetype when you have a guy who is going to be an elite defensive player and then can also be a really good offensive player. An elite defensive big, where you're the most impactful player on that side of the ball by far. And that's what both Mobley and Chet are. They are these super versatile, super smart, super efficient, dominant defensive players. Those guys are always going to have star impact anywhere they go, and they can both still get so much better. Paolo, I can see a world in which this stuff doesn't get better, and in which he is just an inefficient guy who doesn't really figure out the shot selection stuff. There's no path for a guy like Mobley or Chet. Those are always going to be guys who I'm dying to have on my team 10 times out of 10. Paolo, it's not a lock. Like, I think he's going to turn into probably a top 15 player, but I'm not positive about that. There's two roads that he can go down, and year 4, we'll see. That's going to be a big one, because if this stuff doesn't start to get better, like, now we're really getting concerned. But Orlando's fucked this year. You know, I thought Orlando could win a playoff series coming into the year if they get the right matchup. Nah, dude. They haven't gotten better at all. Franz has gotten better. That's the good news. But they are still a pretty tough watch. Pretty ugly watch. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From monster slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props.
Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking how many points your favorite player will have. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. First timers, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly.
Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. We were just talking about the Chet Paolo debate, Logan. Two guys from the same draft class. I've always been Team Chet. Before we go, I want to do two more debates about guys from the same draft class, highly drafted players who will sort of always be compared to one another because of that. Who is the better basketball player right now, Logan? Zion Williamson or Ja Morant? The numbers 1 and 2 picks, of course, from the 2019 draft.
I think Zion is the better player, but I would rather have Ja Morant on my basketball team. And unfortunately for Zion Williamson right now, with his injury history, he's on my banned list. You know how people have like parlay banned list, Carson, where they bet on Najee Harris to do something good for them in a game or something, and now
or like banned books like Fahrenheit 451. You don't want the children to read because you don't want them to be educated.
Yeah, exactly. Which is just
another example.
Preposterous. I don't think we should ban media like that. I actually think that goes.
Well, you've been an advocate for it, Logan. Yeah. But go ahead. Harry Potter too, because of the witchcraft.
That's blasphemy. Actually, I will be seeing you in court.
Well, you have said that the Harry Potter books are blasphemy because of the witchcraft. That's true.
I can't read, so let's just get that straight.
Which is another problem, yeah.
But Zion, unfortunately, is on my banned list, and he's on my banned superstar list, right? I was talking about guys like Mitchell Robinson and Robert Williams, who are valuable archetypes in this league of defensive bigs. They're on my banned list, but they're just banned players because of their injury history. These are banned superstars, and because they're superstars, they're a lot more polarizing when we talk about these guys. The Joel Embiids of the world, the Kawhi Leonards of the world. Zion Williamson, I unfortunately do lump into that territory. When Zion Williamson is healthy, he's a top 15 to top 10 player on the planet. There are very few guys that I would rather have on my team than Zion Williamson. He is a one-of-one athlete in basketball history. He gets to the rim so effortlessly. And what I think gets underrated with Zion is he gets lumped in with these powerhouses like Giannis and LeBron, and they're good comps because these guys are so physically dominant and overwhelming that they can just get to the rim at will. There are very few guys that can stop them, if any, on the planet. The difference with Zion is, god damn, he's got such good touch and body control. Like, everybody thinks of him as...
Let's not say that LeBron doesn't.
Well, I'm not saying these guys don't either. They do as well, but I think that gets underrated with Zion more because people look at him as this bowling ball, and he is really physical, but he's got this physicality that he just matches with this finesse, and it is such a hard... It's such a hard combination of skill and power to stop, and that's why I want him. He's got the 5th most free throws attempted per game of any active NBA player right now. 8 attempts per game. When you think about a guy that scales to the playoffs, that's a weapon. Where I know every game he's going to get me those looks. He's going to collapse the defense. He gets so much attention.
And there's 0 ticky-tack fouls.
They're all real. Yeah, exactly.
Very real. Nothing that isn't going to get called in the playoffs.
Yeah. And that's why I want Zion. It's 101 stuff. And I don't want to undersell what Ja Morant is as an athlete too, because he's very special. But Zion is in this category of players that you don't have an answer for.
Yeah.
Sure, you can play drop off of him. He's still going to go through you. With Ja, you can force him more into settling for mid-range pull-ups and settling for that three-point shot a little more. And I want to give Ja Morant an immense amount of credit. I think he has improved his floater touch. I think his mid-range game is more deadly than it was, when he was a very young player. I think he's more deadly in that area than he's been before. But there are counters that you can have for Ja. And Ja still has his inefficient nights when he is settling for jump shots. There's answers for him. I don't think there's an answer for Zion. So if you could guarantee me health, and look, I'm more optimistic about Zion's health than I ever have been before. Reports are saying that he's the lightest that he's ever been. He's 260 pounds. That's very, very encouraging. You're never going to get me to fully buy in on a guy with an injury history that's this long. I checked the Carfax, right? Embiid, Kawhi, Zion, they're all on my banned list, unfortunately. And so I think Zion's the better basketball player. I would rather have Ja Morant on my basketball team, even though Ja's dealt with his injury issues too. I mean, he missed an entire year off of his band, off of him being banned. So,
well, yeah, that was 25 games, and then got hurt.
They both aren't the most reliable or durable stars, and their styles of play. Both of these guys, it's a lot of strain on your joints and body, bouncing and jumping up this much. I'd still rather have Ja Morant, but I think Zion Williamson is the better basketball player. He is such a basketball anomaly.
Yeah, the reason that I wanted to talk about these two is because I think that they both have had pretty interesting seasons in their own ways. I think Zion has had an underrated season that now is starting to get some love, and I think a lot of people have been very critical of
Pelicans game.
Well, they're terrible. It's brutal. But shout out Trey Murphy, another dude who's probably had an underrated season. But I think Zion is a lot better than Ja. You want to know Zion's per 36 averages this year, Logan?
Lay him on me.
Prepare yourself for fucking liftoff, pal. 31, 9.5, and 6 on 59% true shooting.
I wonder who else is doing that.
Giannis and Jokic, maybe. No, Jokic probably not, because I think he's over 36 minutes a game. That is absurd, dude. That is absurd production. Same thing it's always been, man. Literally nobody can deal with Zion on an island. The combination of first step and power and vertical pop is like nothing that we have ever seen. And so he's an absolutely dominant scorer, and he's a legitimately good passer. And now, you mentioned his touch. I mean, it's not just that he's like a rim pressuring and rim finishing force like we've never really seen from a perimeter player. He's shooting 48% in the paint outside the restricted area. That's compared to 38% last year. So he's taking more of those shots, which aren't as efficient as the shots around the rim, but that's such a valuable counter for him to have legitimately really good touch from that area.
Sorry, not to cut you off. I just looked it up. It's just Giannis.
That's unbelievable. That's just absurd. He's also averaging the second most free throw attempts per game this year, only to Giannis. He gets to the line 9 times a game in the 28 minutes that he's playing. His team is 10 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor. There is just no world in which he's not a top 15 player if he's healthy. Zion gets deprived of being in such elite conversations. Like, realistically, healthy Zion, Logan, he's in, like, Ant conversations. He's clear of, like, Donovan Mitchell. I'd take him over, like, Jalen Brunson. Like,
Over Book?
I'd take him over Book, man. He is such a freak offensive force. And honestly, maybe this is crazy. I might still rather have him than Ja, like, even accounting for the availability stuff. Just because if Zion can stay healthy for 1 year, I feel like I have a dude who could maybe be the number one on a championship team. Oh, it's the biggest if ever. It's the biggest if ever, dude. And, like, that's what sucks is realistically, he's going to go down as, like, one of the biggest bummer what-ifs in NBA history. He's going to be one of those guys where people look at his numbers, they look at his production when he's on the floor, and they're like, oh, my God. And maybe the raw production even sells short what a remarkable talent he truly is, and just can't put together 70 games and then a healthy postseason. Like, it really, really sucks, and that probably is the reality for him going forward. But like I said, if you put the right team around him, which New Orleans has not done at all, and he can stay healthy, like, I think that Zion absolutely can be the number one on a championship offense. And then there's some clunkiness with how he can fit in defensively when he basically has to be like your 4 defensively because he can't stick with smaller players, even though offensively I think he can basically be your point guard. And so then you have to figure out, you have to really get a center who can ideally both protect the rim and space the floor on the other side. Like, there is some clunkiness in terms of building a great team around him, but I think it can be done if you prioritize shooting, you prioritize perimeter defense and overall defense. Like, Zion can create such great offense for you in so many different ways, and nobody can stop him.
I just really wish the Pelicans hadn't done the DeJounte Murray deal. I know we didn't like it at the time, but I mean, you look at the assets that they have right now, and I don't think the Pelicans are that far away from creating a really good starting 5, at least around Zion. Getting off Brandon Ingram, I think the next step is to get off CJ McCollum. But think about this hypothetically, if they hadn't done the DeJounte deal, you could have a lineup with Dyson Daniels at your point. Yeah. You could have Herb Jones and Trey Murphy on the wings next to Zion. And then you figure out that 5 guy. Ideally, honestly, my perfect scenario would have been to get a guy like Khalil Ware alongside Zion Williamson long-term, a guy that's athletic, that can protect the rim, that has a little bit of that perimeter skill as well. And then you're looking at a lineup that I think is really, really dangerous. You're strong defensively at every spot except with Zion, and I think they can make up for his shortcomings. You've got size and length everywhere. You've got shooting. You've got some skill. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a major burden on Zion Williamson to produce offensively every night, but I think that's a really...
He'll do it, man.
I think it's a really cohesive lineup. I think they make up for Zion's flaws, and I think Zion amplifies all of those guys. I think they kind of screwed the pooch with some of these moves. Like, I'm glad they got off Brandon Ingram. I think that's good for them long term. But I think the DeJounte deal is kind of a bit of a step back. And
I agree.
They're just really, really far away right now, which is really disappointing because I think Zion's ready to go.
Yeah, and they just continue to invest a lot in the wrong guys around him. It's kind of that simple. Like, B.I., we just seen wasn't the right fit, and so that's good that they eventually moved off of him. But DeJounte, man, like a guy who's going to be a very questionable shooter, is going to score with poor efficiency, wants to have the ball in his hands a lot. I just don't like DeJounte Murray. I just don't think he's as good as he was ever billed to be when people are really hyping him up. And then CJ's not the guy who's like the sort of lead playmaker that you would like, and he has some of his defensive limitations. What I will say is Zion is having his best defensive season. Like, I've been impressed with his activity there. I think that his rim protection in somewhat limited spots, but like has actually been quite good. He's averaging like 3 stocks per 36 minutes. So that's not to say that he's a good defender, but I think that he's been more decent there than he has in years past. And he's just the sort of like freak unstoppable talent that if you put the right dudes around him, you can get there. Ja, to me, is not that guy. I have not been the highest on Ja for some time. Actually, I was really high on Ja as a prospect. He was my number 1 guy in this class, and then I thought he had a great rookie year. And then I just think certain people overhyped him because he's so electrifying to watch and because he's such a great athlete, and they overlooked some of his flaws.
Well, I also think people sometimes can kind of do this with a lot of guys, and they can just kind of assume that he's going to become a great jump shooter, and I think a lot of people did that with Ja, especially after that it was a series against the Lakers, right?
Yeah, the one game where they were getting obliterated, but
yeah, and I think people
He
can
shot really
kinda
well
just,
from three in that whole series, I think.
yeah, I think people can kind of just attribute that and expect that he's going to take a super leap to becoming a great shooter and kind of overlook some of those limitations. But Ja's still a really fantastic player, and I think this is the best playmaking and selfless version of Ja that we've ever seen. I've really liked him as a initiator and just as a passer this year.
He's another dude where I think a lot of people are doing the overly reactive discourse of, oh, Ja sucks now, and like just totally missing.
He's been inefficient. I mean,
well, he hasn't even really been that much more inefficient than we're used to. Like, Ja's never an efficient player. There's been a lot made of his production, his lack of elite production this year. I don't think Ja's gotten worse. I don't think that he's having his best season by any stretch of the imagination. His touch hasn't been quite as good as we're used to this year. His finishing hasn't been quite as good.
He's also playing 29 minutes a game.
Well, I think the much bigger thing even than just that has been the change in his role. Memphis has undergone the most dramatic change in offensive identity and system of any team in the league. They have gone from being this team that in so many ways is Ja, go out there, run 20 pick and rolls a game for us, dictate everything for our offense in the half court, to the team that runs the fewest pick and rolls that we've seen from any offense in more than 5 years. That's about finding the mismatches. That's about really running a lot through Jaren Jackson Jr. as a scorer. Like, you've halved the amount of pick and roll that Ja runs. Literally, over the last 2 years, he was running 20 pick and rolls a game. This year, he's running 10.4. That's by far when he's at his best offensively. That's when he's at his best as a playmaker. That's when he's at his best as a scorer in the half court, because he's an awesome transition player. So it's not just that you're now taking the ball out of his hands some in terms of what he does best. You're also putting him in more positions to do stuff that he's just not very good at. He's got more attempts coming from three. Not a good three-point shooter, 31%, but that's what he was 2 years ago, the last time he really was healthy for a season, right? He hasn't gotten worse there. He's spotting up almost twice as much as he was 2 years ago. These are not things that he does well. The Grizzlies' new offensive system does not suit Ja individually well, but this team has the best half-court offense of the entire era that Ja's been there, by far. This is the first year that they've actually been a slightly above-average half-court offense, and you are unlocking stuff with Triple J. This team does shoot the ball better. They move the ball better. So, like, it's working overall. It's just not working for Ja individually. I'm in the same place that I've been with Ja for years, where I think certain people overrate him because he's so electrifying, and people want to tell you he's a top 15 player, and he's really like a top 30 player. He's an elite playmaker. He is ridiculously hard to stay in front of with his first step and his handle, and he can just fly around the rim and show you some incredible, incredible finishes. But overall, he's going to score with below league average efficiency year over year, and sometimes that's because even though he has this incredible ability to get to the rim, sometimes he just has to force his way there and take some subpar attempts because he doesn't trust his pull-up shooting, or he'll overly rely on his pull-up shooting, and that tends to not go well for him. Like, he's just not an efficient player, and he's not a versatile player. He really, really needs to have the ball in his hands and run a lot of pick and roll, and ironically, that is the exact opposite of what Memphis has him doing right now. I still think come playoffs, they'll turn to him running some pick and roll some more. Like, I just think they'll get to a spot where it's like, let's put the ball in our best offensive player's hands and have him do what he's most comfortable with. But Triple J is for sure their best player overall. I mean, just with what he's doing defensively and what he's doing as a scorer. The questions that I have about Triple J as a passer just don't take away from the fact that his two-way impact is absurd because of how great he is as a scorer and as a defender. And Ja's a flawed offensive player. So Triple J is their best guy. I think that Zion is a good bit better than Ja. Of course, I would totally hear the case for preferring to build around Ja just because of the availability stuff. Even though, like you said, he has some availability concerns. They don't compare to Zion. But Zion is a monster when he's healthy. Just an absolute monster.
I'm hoping this is the corner that he needed to turn, man. And I'm hoping that he can keep his weight down and that he can stay healthy. I don't want this to be... We're already on the road to this being a catastrophic what-if in NBA history, but I'm really hoping this is the turning point in Zion's career.
I hope so too, man. Like I said, we're going to do one more of these, though, comparing guys from the same draft class. Who would you rather build around, Logan? Cade Cunningham or Evan Mobley?
For me, it's definitely Evan Mobley, but I do want to give credit to Cade
yes.
Cunningham and how he's improved this year.
Please.
We've seen a steady improvement in efficiency from Cade and field goal percentage and 3-point percentage, and his impact is so versatile. I don't think you can go wrong with either of these guys. The only reason I prefer Mobley is the gap that these two guys had between them as offensive players coming into this year, I think has shrunk with Mobley's development, and I just think there are levels to what these guys can do defensively. Cade's a good defensive guard, but Evan Mobley's a transformative defensive player. But Cade's impact is really versatile. I mean, he is a special playmaker. I think he is a brilliant decision maker. He is patient. He is unselfish. He's pinpoint accurate, and he's deceptive too. And finally, he is amplified by the supporting cast that he has. I mean, I can't think of anybody from last year to this year that has benefited more from the overhaul of their roster, adding in Malik Beasley, adding in Tim Hardaway, adding in Tobias Harris. I mean, I list these names off, and you may roll your eyes and go, I mean, these are very average players. For a team like Detroit, we will take average players. Just give Cade some guys who can do their job at a high level and can knock down shots. And what do you know? Cade's really productive this season, and it's just made his life so much easier. I don't even mean it as just the raw playmaking. I mean in how it shapes defenses and how he can get to his looks much easier now because guys actually have to respect the players that are on the wings alongside him this year. He's one of the best rebounding guards in basketball. He's a good defender. Like, Cade's impact is really versatile, and he's shot up from where he was. I don't think I had Cade as a top 10 point guard for me in the offseason. I think he's there now. There's a lot of good point guards in the league today, but Cade, to me, is there. He has solidified his spot. His impact is just so well-rounded. Now, long-term, I don't know if he can be the lead scorer on a championship team, but I definitely think he can be a best offensive player potentially on a championship team. I wonder if he needs that really potent scoring force alongside him. Just because, as we've always discussed, I don't think Cade gets the easiest looks for himself, but Cade's gotten a lot better this year. I think he is such a smart, brilliant offensive player, and I think it's encouraging, man. I think all the trials and tribulations we've seen from the 3 healthy seasons that we've gotten out of Cade have formed this diamond that we've gotten Cade Cunningham now, and like I said, I don't think you can go wrong with either of these guys. I think that Cade is a borderline top 25 to top 30 player in the league today, and yeah, I'm more encouraged about Cade being a franchise building block than I've ever been. I do want to walk back what I said about Jaden Ivey. I think that was blasphemous. Earlier this year, I think I said that I thought I might want to build around Jaden more.
No, you were tripping. That's okay.
I was bugging. I was bugging for sure.
That's all right. You say some wild shit sometimes, Logan, and I give you a pass or two a year.
No, you do check me though. You do check me.
That's true. I don't really give you much of a
pass. You say you give me. No, you check my ass, which I respect. Which sometimes you do need to get checked. Cade's a man, but we're Evan Mobley Glazers. It was always going to be Evan Mobley.
Yeah, look, man, like I tweeted out yesterday in response to Joel Moran for Pick a Side tweeting out like the top 5 guys 24 and under he'd want to build around. Yeah, he didn't have Chet on there. I said the only reason I'd accept for Chet not being here is health.
Did he have Tyler Hero on that list, or am I?
No. That was your list, buddy.
I do like a little Tyler Hero.
You love a little Tyler Hero. No, he had Wemby, Ant, Cade, Mobley in that order. I said I would definitely take both Chet and Mobley over Cade, and some people got mad and they thought I was hating on Cade. Not at all, bro. I love Cade. I've always loved Cade. I've been a big Cade defender. Like, think about the arc that Paolo's in right now. A lot of people were talking about Cade as if he just sucked last year. Now, Cade was in a much worse situation than Paolo is. Paolo's not in a good offensive situation. Cade was literally playing an offensive hell. Cade was playing with spacing that we have not seen in over a decade in the NBA. He was playing with Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren and Killian Hayes and Isaiah Stewart. That was a very, very common lineup configuration for them where literally nobody else can shoot or really do much of anything with the ball in their hands on the floor, and he's seeing 5 bodies in the paint. People were like, why isn't Cade producing? Why isn't he being more efficient? Even though he was still putting up like 22 and 7 on like not ghastly efficiency. It wasn't good. Cade's the man. Cade is really fucking good, and he's probably a top 25 player right now. At some point before the playoffs, Logan, we're going to rank our top 30 players in the NBA, and I can't wait for it because I've started to do a little bit of sketching how I think that my top 30 would look, and I think that Cade is probably in that top 25, especially if you don't include the guys who are always injured, like Embiid, Kawhi, Zion. They kind of complicate things. But the performance that Cade just had against the Atlanta Hawks, and specifically against Dyson Daniels, dude, was just a masterclass. He had 29 in the first half, and he was cooking Dyson in every way, man. He's shaking him off ball and knocking down catch and shoot threes off some movement. He's posting him up. He's killing him with step backs. Like, when you're 6'6", and you're the sort of playmaker that Cade is, and you play with the self-assured pace that he does, and you're strong like him, you just have so many positive traits going for you. And then an area of improvement for Cade this year has been his shot making. He's always been good for mid-range. He's 42% for mid-range this year, which isn't super efficient offense in a vacuum, but it's a really valuable thing for any guard to have in their bag. And then he's 34% on pull-up threes, which again, maybe doesn't wow you as a number, but he's been so much more comfortable there compared to last year, and he has been better as a pull-up shooter. And then you pair that with the fact that his passing is really his better trait offensively. And he's an 86th percentile pick and roll creator. So he's doing his job. He's carrying this crazy load. His efficiency isn't going to impress you all that much if you just look at it in a vacuum, right? I mean, he's at like basically league average true shooting percentage now, 57%. But that's solid. And then you pair that with the playmaking, and he's improved Detroit's offense by 8 points per 100 possessions. Like, he has really done his job lifting up this offense. And even more impressive, dude, in 26 games without Ivy, since he got hurt, Cade has averaged 28, 6, and almost 10 on 57% true shooting, and he's led the Pistons to a 16-10 record in that time. So it's been wildly impressive what he's done, and he is a super solid defender. The reason that I'm taking Mobley, again, it's a lot more about Mobley and everything that he does at a super high level that I think is just so valuable. But like, Cade does still have his limitations, right? Like, on the year, he's actually 56% true shooting. That is still slightly below league average, and that does speak to the fact that he doesn't get the easiest shots for himself still. Now, he's gotten more efficient this year. He's gotten better as a shot maker. He's gotten better as a finisher. He still doesn't explode past people to get a bunch of easy shots around the rim, and he's still one of the weaker finishing star guards in basketball. He's still under 57% in the restricted area. That's not good. Still turns the ball over a lot, and he has the ball in his hands a lot, but 4.5 turnovers a game is really never excusable, and I do think in several ways he is an elite passer in terms of his size, right? Just the passing he has available to him, his vision. I don't know that I would say his accuracy is elite. I think it's good, but I do think that he misses some passes that the best of the best don't.
He really is creative, though.
Very creative. Absolutely. 100%. And then his handle is not elite. It's good, but like, he loses the handle sometimes where other elite guards wouldn't. So that's where you have some of the limitations in terms of efficiency that make me think, although this guy is awesome, he is not an A-plus offensive engine. He is not the sort of guy who is going to create such seamless offense that I would prefer it over a guy who's going to make me an elite defense no matter what, and then is also going to fill a million different roles offensively and be super efficient, like Evan Mobley. I continue to think that people just undervalue the archetype that him and Chet are in. I think maybe some people look at their raw production this year and don't appreciate the fact that neither of them are playing as many minutes as they could be or as they will in the playoffs. Mobley's under 30 minutes a game. His per 36 numbers are 22.5, 11 and 4 on 64% true shooting while he's a top 3 defender alive. That's nuts. Chet, I mean, just because of the injury, he's only playing 26 minutes a game. But like, think about the impact that a Rudy Gobert has on the game, that a Bam Adebayo has on the game, right? These elite defensive players. And then pair that with legitimately awesome offense. That's such a rare thing. And that's where I think Mobley, Chet, these guys just have such clear paths to being top 10 players. And if you don't include Embiid and Kawhi and Zion, those three like always injured guys, I think Mobley is a top 15 player today. I mapped it out. I think he's a top 15 guy. He's an all-NBA lock this year. I just don't know that a lot of people fully understand that, like, this is a guy who can run inverted pick and roll for you and you get great results. This is a guy who can push and transition for you. This is a guy who will take multiple threes a game and make 37% of them, who's gotten significantly more comfortable as a finisher, who's gotten significantly more comfortable out of the post. And then on the opposite side of the ball, he can guard everybody on the floor at a high level, and he's an elite rim protector. You don't see that combination of skills, and he has so much room to improve because he's already gotten so much better this year compared to last year, and he's still super young. Like, that's just an archetype that I know is going to give me elite winning impact no matter what, on both sides, with great efficiency, and he fits with any combination of players. Like, some people look at that archetype and they're like, oh, you're like a complimentary guy. You're not a number one. You don't need to be an offensive number one to have an absolute superstar impact, man. Has Anthony Davis ever been an offensive number one? No. Has he been at his best one of the 5 best basketball players on the planet at the least? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not saying that Mobley or Chet is going to be Anthony Davis, but I'm not saying that they can't be Anthony Davis.
You just can't take that defensive impact for granted. I mean,
No.
there's two
I think
sides
that's the
of the
biggest
ball.
thing. People just underrate defense, bro. People just underrate defense. It's kind of that simple.
And if you're a one-man defense, I'm sorry, I'm just going to value that really, really highly. It's the reason that Rudy Gobert is one of the gangliest, goofiest, worst offensive players I've ever seen, and yet teams still desire him because he's a transformative defensive player, no matter how much you hate on the guy, right? And that's just the difference to me. And look, I don't want to get too high on the guy, but like, I still think that there's more that Evan Mobley could do.
100%. He's baby KG, bro. Let's just be real. You said it earlier in the year. He's baby KG, and Chet is baby KG, but he can also shoot 40% from 3 on high volume and handles like a fucking wing. Those two are so good. I love them so much, Logan. I couldn't glaze them enough, you know.
40% from deep, OD shooting.
Shooting hang pulls. It's OD, bro. Oh, I love those two. And I really do love Cade. I do love Cade. I just don't think that he is going to have that same sort of insane winning impact that Evan Mobley and Chet. I'm bringing Chet into this conversation, even though he's not in this conversation, just because he balled out last night. And people just don't see it with Chet. Some people still just don't see it. And
that's crazy to me, man.
I can't wait until they do, man. It would be so great if the Thunder won a title just so, like, SGA and Chet could get fully appreciated. Because they are both such monster talents. I mean, obviously not to say that they're on the same level right now, but SGA is a top 3 player. Chet, I won't say where I have him ranked as a player. Let's see how he continues to round into form once he's back and healthy, but I think I'd have him pretty damn high. That's going to do it for us here today, folks. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, the good news is there's plenty more Nerd Sesh content. You can find it across our YouTube channel, all of our full shows about the NBA and the NFL, and our video essays, video breakdowns that we do going more in depth on a single topic. You can also listen to the show across all audio platforms. And you can follow us across social media, TikTok and Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh. There you can see clips from the show, graphics from the show when we do rankings and stuff. And you can see, of course, all of our trivia content there. You can join our Discord if you want. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios to become part of our community there. And you can check out our merch if you want. That is linked in our link tree and at breakingtea.com. So with that, as always, shout out Jimmy Butler. Shout out Jalen Clark. Just thinking about a couple dudes who balled out yesterday. I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.